You're on CYInterview.
I'm Chris Yandak, featured columnist Jay Billstein is with me today on CYInterview. We welcome back for the third time Hollywood legend, actress, dancer, all-around entertainer Ruta Lee. Her anticipated memoir is finally available, titled Consider Your Ass Kissed. Ruta, thanks for being back with us on CYInterview. How are you this morning?
I am thrilled, honored, and delighted to be sharing your lovely audience with you, and thank you for including me in what I call the mishpucha, the family.
Oh, well, we consider you part of the family at this point. You know, so speaking of that, just to open the book, I guess you note at the beginning that if your mother had not had welcomed you at a young age to pursuing the arts, maybe none of this would have ever happened.
Absolutely. She listened to what my kindergarten teacher said, and she just felt that I was very different from the rest of the kids in all of her classes. And Lord knows, Montreal was not exactly the booming spot for showbiz, but my mom gave me the music lessons and the piano lessons, which I hated, and the dance lessons, which I loved. They were fun, acrobatic, you know, all that nonsense that kids do. And I remember that the teacher, Mr. Morinov, of the Russian School of Ballet, was saying to my mother, I don't know if you're wasting your time with your daughter. She's just like my son. They don't like to practice. They just like to get out there and do it. And, you know, that still exists for me today. I really don't care for rehearsals at all, but I sure love getting on that stage and performing. So it's still the same thing.
Well, just a quick one before I forget. So the overall goal really is you want to live to at least 120.
Absolutely. If the Bible promises that to us, I want every single one of those years, and I want them in moderately good health. You know, I don't know how long it can go on. And I'm 86. Well, I'm going to be 86 next couple of weeks, the 30th of May. And wow, I still feel like I'm 32, you know, so what the hell? If God promises it to us, let's grab every one of them and live them well. And I really strongly feel that part of living them well, and I don't mean to preach on this beautiful morning, but I think you have to kind of give a lot of it back. You have to pay it back or pay it forward if you've had any kind of good health or success or in your work, or you're happy in what you do and you're able to earn a living. You got to do for somebody who can't do for themselves.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, two things, and I'm going to throw it over to Jay. Speaking of that, there are a lot of great stories in the book about your work with the Thalians charity and the numerous celebrities who attended the yearly gala functions, from Lauren Bacall to Sylvester Stallone. Why are you concerned about today's young Hollywood stars not doing enough for charitable causes?
I feel that we paid attention to that awful Dr. Spock, who said, you know, don't spank your children, don't do anything, let them be free to interpret and do what they need in life. And we didn't have any kind of discipline. And I feel like charity, doing good works, is in some ways a discipline. It means don't think about yourself so much, think about somebody else. And I just find that this young generation is not as willing to jump in and perform and do and be part of something that means good for somebody else. You know, I know that as a fact. Now, look, it's a great exaggeration, you know, and a great generalization that I'm making. But it seemed to me that whether it was Frank Sinatra or Lucille Ball or Sammy Davis, and you said, come, I need you, there was no, well, are you going to send a plane for me? Will there be a chauffeur-driven car? Will there be a Rolex at the end as a little gift? None of that existed. And now that seems to be part of it. And I don't know. I think that we are not teaching our kids the ABCs of morality in this life and how to live it best, so that you accomplish something for the world as long as you're accomplishing something for yourself.
Oh, I think that's very well stated. So, of course, your book is full of humor. For me, it really was what I took away, that you could have been a lot of different famous Mrs., from Mrs. Fred Astaire to Mrs. Frank Sinatra. Do you think throughout your life you have connected with all types of men in a way that they just enjoy having you around? And aside from that, do you think your friendship with Frank Sinatra blossomed because you didn't accept his personal advances?
You know, that's a very interesting commentary that you just made about my relationship with men. I adore men, and I find that I am maybe not adored, but certainly liked and appreciated by men. And I think part of it, you are so right, is the fact that I approached everything with a wild sense of humor. And if people made passes at me, I think I either laughed them off with a way that made the guy that was making the pass laugh with me, or I was too stupid to recognize it. You know, maybe that's where the luck came in and God took care of me. But I didn't get chased around the desk. And if some guy did sort of make that sort of a pass, oh, what the hell, let's laugh, are you crazy? I mean, sex is really something worth laughing about. We make such a big megillah about sex, and it really, in the overall picture of things, is just sort of a part of life that, thank God we have, because otherwise none of us would be here.
Very good point stated, Jay.
Well, and my goodness, once you've had enough sex, you realize how hilarious it really is. So,
you know, I did a series for CBS, and it was about a retirement community in Arizona. Very nice, you know, where you had to be 55 or 60 or whatever it was to live there. And I had a wonderful role that they called the Black Widow, because I just kept marrying guys so that I could live in the community, and they would sort of die, you know. But it was so charming about how sex is such a big megillah, and yet it's very funny. And older people are the people that can laugh about it most. But CBS kind of were so worried about censorship and what you could say and what you could do, and all I could think was, look at what they said and did on the Golden Girls, and none of it was offensive. It was charming and funny and really funny, and I think they killed the series by just censoring it to death.
you know, overthinking it, no doubt, but I guess that is always part of the yin-yang between performers, writers, and the so-called suits who don't have the same sensibilities, perhaps, and are looking to defend corporate interests. I want to get to your book. There's just so much here. We're going to have you back, I don't know, 70 or 75 times to really get into it.
Is tomorrow too soon?
No, not at all. Actually, we have an opening this evening. First of all, I've got to start with your graduation photo. Hubba hubba. I mean, come on. You are so self-effacing when it comes to your looks. I'll go from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. First, you have your high school photograph, and by the way, Hollywood High. I mean, to me, growing up in New York City, you know, Hollywood High was like some kind of mythical place. I went to Martin Van Buren High School. I mean, who wants to even go back to a reunion there? I'm sure there are some people. I mean, Martin Van Buren wasn't even a good president. I mean, you went to Hollywood High. So, an amazing place. And then toward the end of the book, shoulda, coulda, woulda, I think the chapter was, you're talking about meeting Andy Warhol. And Warhol, you know, I want to come to New York and I'm going to make you this and that and you'd be the biggest thing. And you're thinking, I don't know if I want to get into this kind of LSD, God knows what they're doing world.
Yeah.
And then he becomes Andy Warhol. But he said something that always struck me about you, going back to when I'm a little kid watching Hogan's Heroes and all, Monroe-esque. I think part of your appeal is that as much as I don't think you put it out there and you're willing to admit it, You are very beautiful, but you downplay it and you're not full of yourself. And I think there are other women who know they've got it and let everybody else know they've got it. And I don't think that's endearing.
That's very, very sweet of you to say. Thank you. Warhol did see something in me, and there are some photographs of me where I look somewhat like Marilyn. Oh my God, she to me was, in her own darling way, a goddess. But oh, what insecurities she had, clearly. I only met her one time, but she was so glowing and looked almost angelic. You know, that sexiness looked very, very sweet and very pure, which was kind of lovely. But I have never in any way thought of myself as any kind of a beauty. And I remember talking with Debbie one time, Reynolds, you know, like my sister, dearest friend. And she said, Ruta, you and I are no beauties. We're cute. We're darling, we're adorable, we're cute, but we're not beautiful. And therefore, when somebody says, my God, you're beautiful, I go, you're full of it. You know, I can't possibly be. But, okay, so sometimes I photographed well and I was lucky. But thank you for the great compliment. My God, Jay, thank you so much.
Well, it's for real, and I'll tell you, it took me a long time to learn this for myself. People used to give me compliments, and my first reaction would be based on my upbringing, you know, you got to get out more. You've got to set the bar higher. Oh, you're so good at this. Oh, you're so great at that. You got to get out more. I've learned over time just to say thank you, you know. Sometimes
yes.
we can't see ourselves as what we really are. You used the term before, mishbucha. I think I'm going to butcher the Lithuanian language. Mishbucha is Yiddish for family. I think in Lithuanians, is it Sima? Is Sima the word? Shema. Shema is the Lithuanian word for family.
Yes.
You've had a family that's gone well beyond your genetic or your bloodline family. You mentioned Debbie Reynolds. Of course, you and she at one point were both president and chairwoman of the Thalians. All the good work you did there, her friendship so meaningful to you. One thing that almost shocked me out of my chair reading the book is you wrote at one point she was living in her car with her kids because her husband left her with all these gambling debts. And you said she didn't even think about bankruptcy. She just got off her tuchus. We're having a Yiddish fest today. You had Megillah, right? So she got off her tuchus and she danced off the debts. What kind of resilience did you learn from her and how she approached her challenges?
Well, you know, I never had to suffer the way she did. At the adversities of being, you know, many millions of dollars in debt, thanks to Harry Carl, who was, when he had it, he was very good and very generous and caring and all of that good stuff. But unfortunately, he got trapped in this need to gamble, and well, what can you say? So her beautiful home, her everything was lost. Everything went to God knows where. And there were many times when she and the kids slept in the car because they just didn't have a place. And she never opened her mouth to me about that to say, give me some money or can I? Well, there were times when I loaned her money, and she was honorable enough to put up like her diamond earrings and say, this, in case I get hit by a bus, this will repay my debt. I call that a good Texas upbringing and, you know, caring about the fact that there's a higher being than yourself and your manager. There's God, and she depended, I suppose, there. And God did come through for her. He gave her talent, and she never, ever, ever thought about taking a bankruptcy, which was, I think, incredible. And to think, and then the sad part is that she worked so hard on her costumes and memorabilia from the studios. You know, she spent every penny that she ever had on buying those articles when they came up for sale. And to think that she had this collection and these, what can I do but call them schmucks in Hollywood, the cognoscenti of Hollywood, would not think about putting together a museum for all of this stuff. Now they've thought about it. Now that her collection is spread to the four corners of the world. But, you know, when you stop and think that one dress brought her $5.2 million, the Marilyn Monroe dress.
Wow.
Another one brought her another $1 million. Another one brought her, and so she made millions of dollars on selling it, but it broke her heart to sell it because she thought it should stay together in one place and that Hollywood should recognize it. And Hollywood was too frigging stupid to recognize that fact until now, 10 years after she's dead, you know. It just breaks my heart.
Now, you in contrast, for you, diamonds weren't a girl's best friend. Real estate was, and, you know, you get into that and seemingly have done quite well with real estate. Why don't you just give us a tidbit, because we don't want to give the book away, but there was a lot in Los Angeles coming off your big movie. Maybe you can talk about that for a minute, how you know, that first lot you bought.
Well, you know, I'm one of those people that wherever I am, whether it's here, Hawaii, the Philippines, the jungle somewhere, I love it. And I keep thinking, oh, I'd like to be here a little more often. And I learned from my darling parents who were born, raised, married in a tiny little village, which thank God I've been able to visit, in Lithuania. And I mean, dirt poor is exactly it. I write in the book that my mother literally had to carry her shoes across the fields and the streams and everything going to church on Sunday because that one pair of shoes had to be passed down to the next daughter and the next daughter. That's how poor they were. And to think that those poor people who didn't have a pot to pee in got deported to Siberia, and my grandfather died on the way, but that's another story. It's just the survival, you know, you learn that whole thing. And I think my mother and father left Lithuania because there were 3 or 4 brothers on my father's side, and if they were to inherit the piece of land which was the size of a postage stamp from their father, there would be a fight between the 4 brothers, who gets it. And my father was smart enough to say, you know, who needs this? Well, let's go to America where the streets are paved with gold. Everybody knew that. And they couldn't get into the United States. The quotas were closed by then. This was the late 20s. And he got a job working in the wheat fields of Canada. And my mother's family gave him the money to come here, not here, but Canada. Well, it's still America to them, you know. It's North America. And he brought my mother over, and they worked hard. They knew what it was to own. They didn't want to pay rent to somebody else. As soon as they could get the money together, and they worked very, very hard, they, you know, made the down payment and then paid off their mortgage as they went along. And so I learned from them that if you're going to have something, own it. Don't be paying big bills of rent every month to somebody else if you can do it for yourself. And that stayed with me, and I always loved beautiful things and beautiful property, and so we bought a place in Mexico that we liked. Webb and I had a home in Texas. I still have it there, but I don't use it as much. And, of course, Palm Springs, where I am today as I'm talking to you, and the lovely big house in Hollywood. And I've got to tell you that house in Hollywood, which was originally bought for what seemed like an enormous amount of money at the time in the late 40s, was bought for $65,000. Now, needless to say, things have happened, and we've built on it and around it on the 6 acres that we're on. But I have no idea of what that would be worth now. But I would not walk away from it without getting probably $15 million.
Yeah, I think
now
at the
that
very
goes
least.
To show you.
Am I mistaken? Am I remembering correctly? Because there was so much in the book. Was that house originally owned by Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles?
Yes. It was, and it's a beautiful old Italianate house. It's not Spanish as a lot of California houses are. This one's very Italian, and it's beautiful because it's all windows and arches and windows and arches and windows and arches. And the problem with it is that there's no place to hang art, because it's all open. And God, it's a beautiful house. And I often think, now that my darling husband has gone to meet his maker, I sort of think maybe I should downsize. But it would just kill me to have to get rid of all of the stuff that I've got. We collect things. Some of them are treasures that have been given you by other wonderful people that have memories and stories behind them. And I often think, I'm going to die in this house. Let my heirs worry about disposing of it. I'll be dead and I won't worry about it, Because my husband used to say, you treasure this, but one of these days it's going to wind up on a junk truck, being taken out to the yards.
Well, look, I can very much understand the sentiment. I remember when my grandfather, who was a builder-developer in New York, passed away, and he built his own home. My grandmother just didn't want to leave. She just didn't want to leave because she always said my grandfather's name was George. She says, hey, I'm close to George here. I feel close to him. And
now,
she didn't leave.
Where did they come from? What is your background?
Okay. So on my father's side, my father was born in Germany on a ranch that was in the family 400 years. And because we were Jewish, they had to run away from Adolf Hitler and just made it out. So my father's a Holocaust
there's
survivor.
A story there, yeah.
And then on my mother's side, the family lived, my grandmother always called it Austria because of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. But it was actually in modern-day Poland in a town called Tarnobrzeg outside of Krakow. And what's interesting is her father actually was one of the prime builders of the church, even though they were Jewish, because they had such good relationships with the folks there, which is something that a lot of people, I guess, can't conceive. And so they were born in what is modern-day Poland. And then I have other family that grew up what was called, at least in Jewish historical terms, the Pale of Settlement, which was in Russia. So primarily European Jewish people.
Yes, Eastern European,
Eastern European. So I relate to so many things you talk about because of Lithuania and a lot of very, very similar sensibilities. We are going to have you back a number of times on this book. I want to just run through a couple of things in 2 minutes because just so many things hopped out. First of all, I thought I knew a lot about Frank Sinatra. I always thought he was this great fighter for equality and anti-racism, but, when you use the term Mr. Generosity, never heard him referred to that way, and that was an eye-opener. Little disappointed when I read about Sylvester Stallone. I'm not going to give it away, but a little bit of lack of patience, and you said, hey, let him deal with the press fallout.
Yes.
One thing, you made a great point, and I'm going to close with this. You said I could have run GM without the bailout, and this, of course, spoke to your charitable endeavors. I'm going to not call them charitable. There's a concept in Judaism which is very interesting. It's called tzedakah. And the difference between tzedakah and charity, in tzedakah, you don't take credit. You just do the good work. You don't put your name up on the building. And consequently, what Cedar Sinai has, I guess it's no longer part of Cedar Sinai. This center that you and that Debbie Reynolds were behind and the Thalians, it's not the Reynolds Lee Center, right? It doesn't have your name on. It's not the Reynolds Lee Center. And that's tzedakah, because it's yes, you were variously the president, the chairwoman, and so forth, but it was kind of anonymous to the general public. I mean, not to Hollywood. But to a kid growing up in New York, I wouldn't have known that you were doing that. And so I find that very interesting, because to me that's really the truest charity, when you're giving it, but you're not giving it to get the credit. To wit, you mentioned Cedars-Sinai still has the endowment.
Yeah.
But isn't using it to further mental health and so forth, which I found a little bit disappointing.
It's very disappointing. Oh, my God. You've taught me a great new word, tzedakah. I didn't know that word. I thought I knew a lot of Yiddish, but I had never heard that word, and thank you for explaining what it means. And
well, that's what you did, because you just
I'm so
not out
happy
there
you pinned
taking
it on
credit.
me. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
It does break my heart, honey, about the fact that they are sitting on probably $30 million or so of ours, that I would like to see being used in a much more generous way when it comes to mental health. They say, oh, well, yes, we do have psychiatrists that deal with patients and so on and so forth, but it's not a mental health center, which is what that money was intended for. But, I don't have the years left in life or the energy to spend the rest of my life in litigation over where that money belongs.
No, I hear you.
And,
I hear you.
And that was what I decided. I said, Debbie is not of the health to do this anymore, nor is any of us. And so I settled for what I settled for, and that was it. But just think of what we could do with $30 million or so for our returning veterans, which is where our interest and our focus now lies. That's the mental health of our returning kids who wind up living on the streets or God knows where. They need help. They need help, and I'm so grateful to you and any of your listeners who have a couple of cents, a couple of dollars, a couple of $100,000 to give to the Thalians, so that we can give it to our boys and girls that are willing to put their lives on the line for us, no matter where we send them, and then they come back to not the best America has to offer, but get lost somehow. And so we Thalians are doing something about that through UCLA's Operation Mend. Operation Mend takes care of the broken and fractured bodies of these poor people, and we try to take care of the broken and fractured mind and spirit. And I just feel we're blessed. Americans are such generous people. We were talking about Frank Sinatra being generous. Debbie was generous. Frank was, without a doubt, the most generous person I've ever known. And I think most Americans are very, very willing to help if they know the story. And so I sort of ask all of your listeners to go to the Thalians, THALIANS.org, and read all about us. Read about Debbie's adventures with me and mine, and see what we're doing to help our returning young men and women.
Well, very, very well said, and we will revisit this with you, and we're also going to revisit the book with you in part 2 of 72, and all the different adventures you've had, and people like Regis Philbin and Ronald Reagan and James Arness and Charles Bronson and Gavin MacLeod. I learned he was a song and dance man. Never knew that. And Carol Channing, and I could go on and on, but unfortunately we're out of time, so I'm going to throw it back to Chris, but always just an absolute pleasure, Ruta, and this book is, like you, incredible.
Thank you so much, but above all, thank you both for caring and for letting me visit and for sharing your time. And all I can do is, as I say, please take my book title seriously. Consider your darling asses kissed. And may God smile on you both, and please, God, don't forget America. Smile on America. Sometimes I think we forget about God, and I think we have to reach up and say, help. We need it.
I think you're very right, and I'm waiting for your second book called A Ruta Awakening. Chris?
Or rudimentary, or rude of you not to stand up when I walked in, or ruta toot toot.
Very good, very good. You can find Consider Your Ass Kissed available for sale on Amazon.com. So for Hollywood legend Ruta Lee, featured columnist Jay Billstein at CYInterview, I'm Chris Shandak.